Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending, and I hope that everyone's having a really enjoyable time here in Austin. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about self-service and self-service data across the organization. We're going to go into some depth on what's in the product in relation to that, and also a little bit talking about what you've seen in the future in some of the presentations. But before we start, when we talk about self-service and we talk about Tableau talks about self-service and a lot of BI tools talk about self-service, what's that mean? So just kind of a show of hands, when people came down here and flew down here, did anyone use the check-in on their phone and use the mobile check-in on their phone? Okay, we've got a few people. So that's an example of self-service. And every day, I live in Massachusetts, and you can self-service and pump your own gas. You go to the supermarket, you go and you check out. That's self-service. But when you look at all of these things, you say, well, what do they have in common? What is the common element when we talk about self-service? And what I want to talk about today is hopefully help you to see that really the core of this is trust. And when we talk about trust, when you go to that gate, or when you get to, in my case, Logan Airport, and you show your phone and you get to the line, someone lets you through. When you get to the plane, you can get on the plane, you get in your seat. That's trust. Well, it's not trust in the idea of those seminars where you go to where it's like, everyone fall back and someone's going to catch you. That is a type of trust, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about, hey, I'm going to do this and I hope someone's there behind me, whether it's the business or IT, that's really going to help me do this. No, we're talking about the trust that kind of exists in a relationship. When both parties or multiple parties are together and they're all working towards a common goal and they trust each other, and that is the essence of how you build up with a trusted relationship. When we go back and look at trust, we kind of go to something like Merriam-Webster as a source here. Trust is defined as the assured reliance on the character, ability, strength, or truth of someone or something. It also is defined as something in which someone has confidence. So as we think about this and we think about how this can apply across organizations, these form the cornerstone of this. And what this gets to really is trust itself is a big word, but it's broken down into many different areas. And specifically, we want to talk about the trust in people, the trust in the process, and the trust in the data. If we have all three of those, we can really achieve self-service in an organization. So when we look at what's kind of happened in the past with the trust in the people, the traditional report factory system has failed. We had the developer who was sitting there at the center of it, getting requirements, coming in, pulling them together, coming back, and people are like, nah, that's kind of not what I wanted. Just give me a table with all the information. I'll figure it out myself. Well, the real problem with this is that the person at the center of this didn't know the data. They don't know what profitability is, perhaps. They don't know what is the roll-ups or the hierarchy. What KPIs are important. In your industry or in your department, what are the most key things and how you measure stuff? They don't understand that. Now, before Tableau gets all excited about this and we go, yeah, you know what? We've been doing self-service BI and this has really been the answer. It's like, well, kind of, but not really, because in this case here, it actually has failed to deliver also. Because now we have all these authors out there who are putting some great stuff together and great content, but guess what? They don't actually know the data either, because they don't know what customer table to use, perhaps. They don't know necessarily how to join the information together. Do you actually need to do a join? They don't know they've got a history table. Which history table should I use? So you've got these people who also don't know the data. And then what happens is you've got both sets who don't trust each other, because it's like, hey, you have no idea what I do. You don't know where this comes from and all this information. So how do we build this up? Now, as we look at the other area of this, and the process, and the breakdown of trust in the process that has occurred, it's kind of driven by a number of different things. The data explosion that has occurred, we're going to talk about that. Just so much data that's out there. Data warehouses themselves as a technology for the last 20 years have not really delivered. So that process has not really helped to inspire trust. And then we also have the rise of this idea of data empiricism. And this really gets into the idea of I'm not managing by my gut anymore. I'm actually managing by data. So I want to be able to take this information and say, I'm making a decision based on this piece of information. Trust me, and we're going to make this decision. So as we look at the explosion of data, there's many different metrics out there and many different things we can see. But in this case, there's a couple of things. The amount, the volume of data that's going to be here and growing and growing. We've all heard the Library of Congress is now, there's more data than, pick your month in saying that statement than, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times the Library of Congress. We also are looking at the other thing that's going on from a data point of view is the massive growth in unstructured data. So unstructured data now is making up 80, 90% of the actual data in an organization. How do you deal with that? And then the other side of it then is that companies are demanding, we've 12, 13,000 people here. Everybody here is a data-driven organization now. That's how we're expected and how we're working. And there is really good rewards in doing that. So there is a demand for this data. When we look at the data warehouses, what happens with data warehouses? Well, the traditional process, put it all together, it takes too long. When I go in and build it out and I go and say, well, what do we need? We need to get this table from here, we need to get this table, this sources, let's put it all together. Then we have to go through a process of rationalizing it and making it all merge together, master data management, all these different layers that come in. And then the other problem with it then is that's great, you've got something created, but guess what, I want to change it. Well, someone goes and wants to change it now, they're not that flexible. How do you actually change what's there? And then finally what's happened with the explosion of the information is they've actually ultimately not ended up being fast enough nor big enough to actually deal with the volume of data that's out there. From a data empiricism point of view, I've kind of talked about this, is that the management by gut is being replaced by management by data. However, what that's leading to is more and more demands because I get an answer and now I've got another question. Another question is looking for more data. I need to verify. People are getting to the point where oh, great, that's great. I see what's happening here. I understand that we're getting a breakdown in sales in this area. Can we go and understand what's going on? Is this seasonal? Is what's going on? OK, get me more data. And the other one that's kind of key in all of this is that data models themselves are becoming very transient. When we look at the history of a lot of the technologies that we've dealt with in the past, they're all driven by kind of scarcity. We had scarcity of memory because we couldn't address a certain amount of memory. We had scarcity of hard drives and storage because there was only so much available. And we had scarcity of CPUs. So we created all these different ways to deal with these things. But what really came out of it was it took a long time to build it. So we're going to build this data model that's going to exist for a long, long time, forever. We're going to build all these data warehouses that are going to exist forever. But that's changing. Some degrees now, a data element or a dashboard, or however you want to think about that unit, may only exist for as long as you need it. There's a load of dashboards that are running this conference from a Tableau point of view right now. By Thursday afternoon, there's some value in it, but there's no real value in them from a day-to-day point of view. So we want to have an environment that we can very quickly build models together, get data out there, and have a process that can actually feed into that very quickly because they may not be here forever. They could be here for a very, very short period of time. And then when we look at the data, the interesting thing about data now is that in most organizations, the actual amount of data is not the issue. In fact, it's part of the problem. There's a massive amount of data out there. People are gathering more and more data, and when we start going down the path of all the machine tools and the IoT stuff that's happening, there's more and more data coming into every organization. So I don't know what to use. What sources? How do I get to it? Are there certified sources? Do we have a process where someone can say, when we get into a meeting, and there's 4 people in the meeting, that everyone can agree that there's not 6 different variations on this number? That's what we want to get to. We want to have certified sources, we want to have certified numbers, and in fact, we want to have certified visuals that we put together. In fact, in one of our clients, I'm in the Northeast area, so one of our clients in the Northeast, they've actually been running with Tableau, and on a weekly basis, they kind of have the Tableau Person of the Week, what they've done and put things together. One of the people, part of what he did was in a meeting, they had this meeting where typically everyone got together and they're all arguing over the number. He kind of went around, did a little bit of work, and came back into the meeting, and the meeting was completely different. Everyone understood where it came from, the number, and it was hugely changing and transforming for that company. The thing that's interesting is that he had a number of these, so he actually got a free ticket to TC from the company. They paid for him to come to Austin because of what he did and the effect that he's had in his organization. So after kind of talking about how this is all broken, which is kind of part of everything, is kind of from storytelling point of view, we've set it all up here. What do we do? What are we going to do next here about this? Where do we go? Well, we kind of have ideas about where to go because, again, going back to this idea of self-service existing when we go and get on the plane and we're using it every day, we actually have very similar kind of things going on in our regular life, though we may not use them as much as we used to. So in the ideal world, I have an idea. I'm sitting here. I'd like to figure something out. I'd like to go to a place that has a lot of information. So I'm going to go to a library. And from a historic point of view, we all went there, and there's some huge libraries out there. We talk about the Library of Congress. And I'm going to take out some books or some content. I'm going to take this, build upon it, maybe create something out of it. It could be something that's disposed of. Maybe it's just for that meeting. Or maybe I'm going to contribute it back in. I'm now going to add to the volume of data that's out there. And this is really what we think about as the ideal world. If we could take this world and bring it into the organization, this would, we would really improve the organization. So, quick quiz. Anyone recognize this? There's actually kind of two answers. Anyone recognize it? I'll give you one hint. I'm from Ireland, so this mightn't. No. Any Star Wars people here? No. So this is the long room in Trinity College, Dublin. So Trinity College is over 500 years old, and one of its rights, Trinity, Cambridge, and Oxford share the rights that every single book that's published in Ireland or the UK, they get a copy of it every year. So every book that's copied, they get it. So this is a famous library. It's got busts of George Bernard Shaw. It's got all this stuff in there. The Star Wars connection is that this is the inspiration for the Jedi library in Star Wars. So in here, instead, you've got famous Jedis in the past. Of course, the issue you have is most of us are not going to live as long as Yoda to actually go through and start getting to all this data and all this information that's here. So what do we do? What would be great? Well, the ideal situation would be maybe using something like what we knew with Google. Show me great movies by Tom Hanks. Show me how to find sales data and broken down by da-da-da. And you kind of saw that in the keynote. This is what we'd like to do. From a person's point of view or from a user's point of view, we don't care about how we got here. We just want to easily get to the data. So when we look at it too, we want to be able to search by example, we want to look by author, by topic, most recently viewed, most active, most highly reviewed. We'd like to have that kind of scenario when we look at our data. So as we start building upon this, we can talk about how we start establishing the trust and trust in people. The first thing is we kind of talk about this idea of this triad, the kind of atomic unit of trust in an organization is this idea of a data steward, a consumer or a data editor, and an author. And they all work together, and they work in tandem, and they become the unit, and there may be multiple units, but they are what is building out self-service in your organization. The data steward forms a role as a data curator. This person may be someone in the IT organization. It could be someone in the business organization. Many companies are structured where they have a very strong business units with their own IT. That person fits in the middle there. But they understand the data and data structure. They're not necessarily DBAs. They're not going out there creating indexes and doing all this kind of stuff. But they will work with the DBAs or work with IT. They're kind of that conduit back to the people in the back who are looking after the data and managing the data. I often think about when I talk about this is, I don't know if anyone remembers, Monster used to have an ad about 10 years ago where they'd have all these kids getting up and go, when I grow up, I want to be a pencil pusher. And they'd be talking about all these things. And, we have this whole thing where people have been in like IT going, yes, when I grow up, I want to be the person who is creating that report every day where I put that out there. It's like, no, I want to build data warehouses. I want to build big things. That's what they want to do. So the curator is working with those people who are now living their dream. We also have the authors. And the authors are people who understand the content. They understand the business requirements. They understand necessarily what the KPI is. They understand how do we define profitability. They understand how to work with the end users and the data steward. And then we have the consumers of the content. And the key thing about this is that they're not necessarily just blind consumers, like just feed me, feed me, feed me. No, they're people who also have the ability or want to have the ability to get involved in ad hoc exploratory analysis. And why is this important? Because they're going to be the drivers of innovation and new ideas. Because they're the people who are going to take a piece of data someday and go, this is interesting. What would happen if we do this? No one would ever do that. Let's mix this revenue data with our sales data with the weather data. Wow. They're the people who will do something like that and come up with something new that potentially will change your organization. So the first part of it is figuring out the roles and responsibilities. The second part is that probably if you think about your own organization and across the organization, from a Tableau point of view, there are people in your organization who now you trust. They're like, if I have a question, I go to Mary. If I have a question, I go to John. There are people I follow. There are people that have got a reputation for doing great work. Maybe they have an expertise in finance, they've got an expertise in HR. So by the way, being Irish, HR. So they have this expertise, and we follow them. We'd like to have an environment where I can go and look at people to trust in this way and go, let me follow this person as a source. And that's one way of me finding content. The next issue we kind of have, though, is that in the organizations themselves, we have, my slide advancer is a little slow here. We have the fact that there's a lot of distance between business and the data and business and IT. And it may be viewed as maybe the moon looking at the Earth, or it could be the Death Star. It really depends on your point of view, but there's many points of views on this in organizations. As we mentioned earlier on, the data available for the business is usually defined by long gathering requirements, and it just, the data is stale. It's not available at the end, so how do we deal with this? How do we build for now, but also build for the future? How do we start? Because we know that the 6-month, 12-month, 18-month long process has not given us the answers. And what's really happening, though, is that people are like, just give me data, and then I'm going to go and get an Excel file, and I'll enrich it from my Excel file. And now we've got situations where there's governance issues, there's auditability issues, there's compliance issues because of this. So, oops, wrong direction. There we go. All right. So, as I said, let's start now. Perfect is the enemy of the good. If we go for perfect, we'll never get what we want to get to. So how do we actually start off? Well, the big thing about it is the value of that data is only proportional to the answer it can give. So let's start looking at questions. As we start looking at questions, it'll lead to figuring out data sources, and we can build from there. So we talk about the building blocks of this. There's core business building blocks. I want to understand about my profitability or my productivity. So I'm going to get some product data, I'm going to get some expense data, I'm going to get some HR data. And I'm going to understand about my user productivity. So let's just pull that together. Maybe I'm using my cross-database joins or doing different things, but I'm just pulling it together on the fly to answer this question. Now I'm going to lay in some information about my sales data and my facility data. And I'm beginning to build out a data model that is kind of, it's not one of the scoped out. We're building it out to answer questions. And as we build it out and people go, I've got other questions, we expand upon it, and we end up with our enterprise data because we started by dealing with questions and we started looking to build towards that and not have a world where we're actually building up everything beforehand. Another way of looking at this is that we're going to start off with our known knowns. These are the areas we want to ask questions about. I want to understand productivity. I've got a manager who wants to know what's happening across my organization, what happens on Mondays, what the day after the Super Bowl, what's going on, look at my productivity, I want to understand that. As we build upon this, we're going to find the known unknowns. There's nuggets in my data. I know there's stuff in there. And if I go and build this out and add more richness to this data, I will build nuggets, and I will find nuggets, and I will build out more data, and it'll get more value out of it. But the key part is that if I continue with this, I'll get to the point of the unknown unknowns. And the unknown unknowns is a eureka moment. That is where you're finding things that you never thought to find. This is where that person took the weather data, merged it in with the sales data, and took in with the price of shoes, and found something really, really interesting. So as you build this out, that's not something that you can plan for. It's not something where you go, let's go and get all these data sources to put it together. No, the data leads us towards this. So if we're going to have trust in our data, we want to have the fact that it's always going to be available for us. We also want to have a centralized data gateway. I need to know where to go. I'm not talking about necessarily a centralized data warehouse, because again, remember those models getting transient? The other thing that's going on is, I've seen this in a couple of our customers, in the last 4 years, they've gone through 3 different kind of data structures. Hadoop now has been up until now the big thing, but now we're seeing things like Snowflake and other things coming in. So how do we, from a user's point of view, we don't want to say, well, now you have to learn how to connect to this. Let's have a gateway where they can go to, but the underlying part of where they get to is handled by those IT people who are no longer the pencil pushers. They're doing this kind of work behind the scenes to make this work. And then the key part of this is simplified access. Because guess what? I've been kind of doing this for a while. That kind of makes sense to me. It's joins and left joins and right joins. This is kind of interesting, I think. But if I want to answer a question, I don't want to go out and figure out have I got all the things right here. And a lot of users are not going to understand how to do this. I want to come along and just use sales opportunities. I want to pull out sales opportunities, and I want to say, this is what I use. The benefit of this now is that in the background, sales opportunities may be transitioning from one data source to another over time. But from the end user's point of view, they don't care. They're dealing with something called opportunities, and it's always there for them. And this is my centralized data access point for sales opportunities. And if I build upon this, I also want to enrich this and give people the guidance of what's behind it. So this is actually what Tableau uses internally. And we put this together. It's actually flows down, but I kind of put it side by side. But the idea is that within an opportunity, you actually have a breakdown of what's here. We also talk about how to use it. Here's a workbook about it. And here is the data dictionary behind it. So this information is available for the end user if they need to understand what's there. Or if they come along and go, what would be great to have in this data set would be this table, because it's got a flag that actually breaks down our opportunities in a different way. The end users now are driving and helping to drive the building out of that data model. And the end result is that we end up with a trust being assured by the platform. At the lower layers, we have our data. We have our security and scale that's in place. This is, again, as we talk about it, the IT, this is what you want to do. You want to look, I want to build this out. I want to have my security model. This is the kind of interesting stuff. We're going to use Kerberos or whatever we're using. We're putting this in place. We have governance in place so that the right people are seeing the right data at the right time. But at the front end, the business side of it is where the innovation is occurring. This is the people coming along and creating apps on mobile, on dashboards, embedded. But this is, the innovations is now being allowed to grow at the business level because now we have a trusted environment that's laid out here. So how do we achieve this with Tableau? So coming back to our unit, and at the very beginning we talked about this group of people. If we put a unit like this together, the people who know the data now work with the people who know the data. The data steward understands what the tables are. The consumer understands, the author understands what the KPIs are. And the consumer is understanding and saying, well, this is what I want. We now have the people knowing the data working with the people who know the data. And what we end up is a structure like this, where we have our enterprise data warehouse. It could be many, many different sources. We have a data steward now who's sitting there, and they're creating the governed sources here. They're saying what's going to be certified. They're saying, use this, walk into a meeting, hold your head up high, because no one's going to disagree with you on this number. They're helping to create that. But then you also have the authors creating the content and then adding to the metadata. They're building upon this to say, you know, I'm not waiting 3 months for a new calculation to be put in place. I'm going to create this calculation now, and people can use it. They can understand that it's not part of the governed, and it's not part of the certified sources, but it's available, and people understand the concept of doing this. We trust that person, they trust the data, and we're going to have a better environment. From a Tableau point of view, this is just a Tableau structure that I think everyone understands. We have a server, we have the tenants, we have the projects, and then within projects, you have workbooks and data sources. So sites themselves are really logical separations, and then projects are the way to manage the content within those sites. So I can have a HR site, I can have a sales site, I can have a finance site, I have an IT site. And then I have projects within those that deal specifically with areas of that, and I may have shared access across those areas. I have different governed access across those areas. From a content management point of view now, we actually have different projects in place here, and different structures. Just a quick note, by the way, as we talk about this, and we're going to talk a lot now about what we're doing and what's coming along. Extracts themselves were kind of the forerunner of this. This was a way of taking data and creating a certified source. Use this extract because this is defined this way. It's got calculations. We can use this. You can manage all these extracts centrally. There's some really nice benefits of it. Problem with it, and what I've seen and I know from talking to customers, is we end up a lot of times with a proliferation of extracts. We end up with some duplication of extracts. So we've got 5 extracts that are kind of the same. And then you also have auditability questions. So what do you do? How do you actually deal with this? The way we deal with this is data server. So data server from Tableau server is the key part to all of this. We define things once, and they're shared. People are connecting in through Tableau server to a shared data source with a single definition. We can have 1 or more tables in here. I can have multiple tables in there. I can have my joins across different databases even. But from the user's point of view, it is going to be a seamless experience. Sales opportunities is what I connect to. I don't know where it is. I actually don't really care. I trust the guys behind the scene on this. We've got our hierarchies in place. Our rules are in place about how to use it. And if I make changes, this will cascade down. We want to see that happening in the organization. And we also have certified and uncertified sources. And uncertified sources are very important because that's where, again, innovation is going to come from. Because someone needs to go and look at this and say, you know what, this is kind of interesting. Let's go and plug it in and see if we can edit it, we can clean it up, and see we're going to share it out for everybody, and it's going to be a certified source. But we also want to have certified sources because we're running multi-billion-dollar companies on this data, and we want to make sure that it's certified. So what is a data source? A data source itself is an XML document that has just information about the database connections, the joins, the hierarchies, the calculations, the groups. It's everything you've kind of seen in dimensions and measures all put together in one little unit. The beauty of it now is if you have something like this in place, is it's reusable, it's shareable, it's centralized, and it's controllable from using something like data sources. So what's in a data source when we look at it from a metadata point of view? So in this case here, we've got close date. We can see the close date comes from the opportunity table. It's a date time type. We have some information. We have some domain information in here to understand the values that are in here so I can see whether this is a field I should use. But this is the metadata that's here around the data sources themselves. And what happens if I use data sources as opposed to connecting directly? Well, when I connect directly, the user goes from desktop straight to these sources. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. However, if I'm using governed data sources, there's a couple of things. Now I can go from my desktop browser, my apps. I'm opening up a new world that I can actually connect to. The second thing is that I've governed sources. I now have these sources that are connecting, and I know who's connecting. I've got auditability. I know who's touching this data. From a regulatory point of view, if someone comes back and says, well, who connected to this at this time, you can actually see that information. Now, granted, you can see that information in going back to database logs, too. But this gives you more richness in there. And then the other side of it, too, is from actually an IT point of view, you actually don't end up needing drivers on the desktop end. You don't have to deal with any of that. You can just come along saying, this is how you connect. There's no other way to get to Oracle. This is it. So that's, and it works. It's very, very powerful. So hopefully at this stage, I got your attention. So I want to talk a little bit more about what's in the product and what's in Tableau to help with this. So within Data Server itself, we have what are the sources that are available. This is an example of our Alpo, and people have probably heard about Alpo before, but this is the server that basically runs all of Tableau. It's all the data and everything about Tableau that goes on there. We actually used to, and we still do, have direct access to the databases behind there. But from an end user's point of view, you're going in going, what do I connect to? And even the smart people were making mistakes in there. As you roll off time, as you took stuff out, you took opportunities and you moved them into the past. What do you do? So the data sources enabled a broad range of people to easily get access to data. But when I've got this information, I still want to understand what do I use? So we can actually navigate by usage. So we can actually look and see how many views. This data source, there's a lot of people who are using it, or a lot of people have viewed it. This looks like it's important. This is almost like going back to our movie rankings. I want to find a movie to watch this Friday. Well, here's a movie that a lot of people have watched. That might be a good thing. I can look at the number of workbooks attached to it. So now I can see, well, it's not just people have viewed it, but a lot of people are using this data source to build out content. So this is probably a good data source to use. I can also find these sources by coming along and looking here in the different projects. I can look at the dates. I can look at all this information that's in the metadata around what it is, and I can search the connection types. Maybe I want to find a SQL Server data source. Maybe I want to find a source that's on my, on a certain address. I can find that out. I have all the sources here as a way of actually getting to the information. And another thing that's very important is we have permissioning. So when you publish out workbooks to the server, you have permissioning that actually happens. You've seen that going on. You also have the same thing on data sources. So you can actually say that these people have access to this data source, or these people have the right to make changes to this data source. Similarly to what you do with workbooks, you can do the same thing with data sources. So now you have the ability to control not just whether they have access, but how they have access to the information that's here. And then finally, from a data source point of view, you can actually look and see, oh, here's all the connected workbooks. Here's everything that uses this data source. This looks like something maybe I should use. There's a lot of information here. So I can come along here and look at these workbooks. Finally, we have, got a transition that I didn't want. In Tableau Server, we have, hold on one second. Ready. So finally, in Tableau Server, there's a whole load of information in here about usage patterns, when it was used, how many views, and this is where our team, so Tableau itself has an actual team, an analytics team. It's run by Jeff Mills, and at the end, one of the sessions I recommend is going to one of theirs, because they talk about how we use Tableau. We actually have a whole thing called Tableau on Tableau that talks about how we internally use Tableau from a sales, finance, IT, HR point of view. But the way his team does and manages this is they go into the repository, understand, well, who's using different data sources, like the actions by the users, what are they doing, and then looks at things like load times and things like that for optimizations. There's lots of different things. So there's actually both a usage kind of management point of view, but also is things being productive? What's going on? Breaking down, understanding why this is taking so long. They do a lot of this, a lot of analysis on these. And part of the reason on that is that his team as data stewards will go back to the data team, the internal Tableau data team itself, and go, our workbooks or our dashboards are taking a while because we're doing this query and we believe it needs an index. And they'll go, OK, we'll fill out a paperwork, we'll do it in 10 months. No, we actually do it right away. But we go in and do, put indexes on there or whatever needs to be done. So there's that collaboration going on between the data steward or the data steward entities and the data people and the data environment. So this is kind of, a person who's running the data center, they can go in into logs and probably find stuff going long-running queries and that kind of stuff. But guess what? That's kind of a bit of a needle in a haystack, whereas this allows the team to come along and go, oh, this is a problem. Let's go and fix it. How do we fix it? Do we fix it on the front end? Do people need to design better workbooks? Or do we fix it on the back end, perhaps, because maybe we need to change our data? Yes? Sure. So in relation to, if I go back here, this is all tied, it's at the site level. So as you connect in, you're going to go to, your rights go to a certain site. So you're going to see this as part of your sites. Where this comes into here, this is getting into the analytics, and this depends a little bit on the actual connection you make to the Postgres database. Some of it you can go in and see all of this stuff across the board if you wish to.
But, so viewing connected workbooks or viewing usage of those data sources is really intended at the site level rather than sites.
Yeah, and the reason is the sites are the logical separation on a server. What we do recommend, like in an ideal setup, is you have sites and then you use projects, and then project content is within projects. That's kind of the process that makes a lot of sense there. Oh. All right, so there is some more, if you're interested. So we're going to talk a little bit about actually what was presented yesterday, some new features that's coming, and this is really exciting because I think this is really going to enhance this. So we're going to look at the whole idea of enhanced content. So now, and this is all kind of the design of where we're going. So this may not exactly look like this, but this is the idea. So now I can come along, and I want to have centralized metadata management. I want to come along and see something here, like, I don't know what we're selecting here, but I want to look at the whole customer source. I want to understand about it. I want to understand, as we look at this, how many fields, how many dimensions, how many measures are in this. It's got 420 workbooks, 212 users. I can understand that here, and even some sample information about the data. We can also look and see graphical region, kind of what we showed before, but now I can look at it on a server point of view. What's in it? What are the contents? There's 1,237 members in here, distinct values in there. Here are some of the values that exist in here. What's really cool, though, is now I can, sorry, you can look at that a little, is that I can also look at things like the calculations. So net sales now, that's how it's defined, maybe how it's defined across the organization. If this becomes a certified source, a certified calculation, this is the way that everybody uses sales across the organization and net sales.
So that calculation is initially done in a workbook, or you're doing it at the data level?
This one, well, it's kind of done in the workbook right now.
Right. So
yeah.
The question I have then is that workbook actually has to be pushed back up.
Yeah, so all of this gets into publishing. Well, it could be a published data source. So as you publish, I mean, it's a calculation at a data source level.
Yeah.
And in theory, it's in the workbook. So there was a slide in here I had before in that the metadata about data sources can exist actually as segments within workbooks themselves. If you actually ever open up a workbook in an XML editor, you'll see something called data sources, and they'll have all that laid out there. There's also a file called a TDS file you may have seen, and that actually would have kind of the metadata around this, and that's what gets published out to the server. It could be published as part of the workbook. And actually in 10, maybe slightly before that, you may have seen that we have the ability now to replace data sources on there. So what happens is you can actually take a data source now, even if it's in a workbook, and override that part of the workbook and say this is a brand new data source or brand new area, how you connect in here. It's all based upon that idea of taking these things and doing that. So this is just very simple, calculation, 216 workbooks, 188 users. They're kind of, in theory, you can click on those and see what they are. That's a lot of what Tyler and team will be actually doing, building this out. The other thing, too, is from a data optimization point of view, this field is not used anywhere. Do we just get rid of it? It's just there, or like, do we need it? Do we care about it? Let's remove it. Is there any impact of removing it? We can actually look and understand that. You can also go the other direction eventually when we look at this and say, well, this is used only 1 or 2 places. Maybe we should actually look at this and replace that usage of this in 2 or 3 places by usage of something else that's actually equally equivalent, and we can rationalize our data management because of that.
When you're saying it's not used, do you mean it's not being used in workbooks?
Yeah, it's not.
That users aren't dragging it into analysis?
Yeah, this is not. It's not being used in a workbook. Yeah, it's not used by. Yeah, so this gets into what you want to do with it. Really, like this is not. 30 days after we roll this out, no one's using this element, so we probably still want to keep it for a while. And then this is one of the key things you've heard about this kind of yesterday, is this idea of certified sources. So this idea, and it was green, I think, on what they showed. I had just slightly earlier version of this. So the idea is I can quickly come in here and see certified sources. So if I search for something up here like regional, and I go across and there's options, I've got quota here. Here are sources that meet that search criteria, and these are certified. And what that means is that someone has come along and blessed this source, how it's laid out, it's good, it's reusable, and so on. But you also have the ability to have certified and uncertified sources, because it's important to use those uncertified sources too. Because again, as we said earlier on, this is potentially where new thoughts, new ideas, new things may come from. So we want to have the ability to have uncertified sources. And I think you may have seen yesterday, then you have the idea that the workbooks that use certified sources would potentially become certified workbooks. So now you're in a meeting where everyone's using a certified workbook, and that means that we've trust in the data because of that. So the end result of this is that we've trust established. We have all the users, we have our atomic unit, or more of them put together, and we have our data. And we have a structure like this in place, where we have the self-service hub, the governed data sources, and the enterprise data we saw before here. But this structure now puts an equal balance on the management and the trust on the authors as on the data steward, and behind the scenes on the IT. We're putting all of these together, and we're building up for the people, the process, and the data here. So finally, hopefully, we have trust in people, we've trust in process, and we've the trust in data. So these are some sessions I think you might find interesting. So some of them are today. So the one as mentioned about Tableau Center of Excellence, that's our internal team tomorrow morning. And then these are others around governed data and designing your data source strategy. So with that, please fill out the survey, and I'll take questions or any. Yes, go ahead. Any? All right. Well, thank you very much, and hopefully you'll see yourself.